Before I begin my introduction tonight of Julia, I need to give an introduction of two other characters that might become fixtures of tonight's talk. The first being Baha'u'llah, whom, if you're not familiar, the Baha'is believe was given a message from God in the latter half of the 19th century. And the second being Abdul Baha, who led the Baha'i faith, was the first leader of Baha'i faith who did not have a divine revelation given onto him. And I bring these two people up because I need to tell you two quotes to put tonight into context. The first is from Baha'u'llah, and this is coming from a divine source. You know, the Arabic Hidden Words is the book, and he says, "Thy heart is my home, sanctify it for my descent. Thy spirit is my place of revelation, cleanse it for my manifestation." And the my, of course, being God. And the second quote comes from Abdul Baha, commenting on the human mind, not the human heart. He says, "The mind is the powerful human spirit. The spirit is the lamp. The mind is the light which shines from the lamp. The spirit is the tree, and the mind is the fruit. Mind is the perfection of the spirit and its essential quality, as the sun's rays are the essential necessity of the sun." Now, the reason I bring these quotes up is because I'm happy to reintroduce Julia Rodriguez, who is not speaking at this fireside for the first time. In her first talk, she spoke about her experiences of her heart, falling in love with Latin America and its denizens, and her love for her family who live in the Dominican Republic, and how she came to love them genuinely. But tonight, she's speaking about the mind. And just as she has expertise in matters of the heart, she has expertise in matters of the mind as a psychiatric nurse practitioner who has worked in the mental health field for the past 12 years, treating a wide range of mental health disorders, including depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, PTSD, and others. And her faith, just like her love, her practice, her medical understanding, just like her love, has been sustained by the Baha'i faith which she practices. This is an amazing human being, an amazing speaker, and I'm glad to hear her talk about this matter. Julia, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, if I may say, I am delighted to be back, and thank you so much for the honor of being able to speak again with you guys. This is a topic that I have had a lot of time to reflect on, and this presentation is going to be specifically about the way the Baha'i faith frames mental health, but also the way the Baha'i faith frames suffering in life. The purpose of suffering, because that is part of struggling with a mental disorder in today's world, is that there's a tremendous amount of suffering. And so to be able to kind of understand how Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha frame the experience of suffering and the human experience can give meaning, and also give a sense of purpose when a person is going through something so challenging. So it's going to be a little of both of those topics, plus a little bit of my own story, which I think will illuminate to some extent some of the points that I'm making. So without further ado, I'm going to start. Let's see if I can make sure how to work this. Wait a minute. There we go. So I think perhaps just a framework for everything that we're going to talk about tonight is this concept that absolutely everything that happens to us in life has a purpose. Baha'u'llah says, "I have ordained for thy training every atom in existence and the essence of all created things." And this to me is incredibly reassuring, because basically what it says is no matter what happens to you, God is behind it. God has got his hand in that, and that we can have faith that it is in our best interest. It's for our training, it's for our development, it's for our souls. So kind of the key points of tonight's presentation: how do we define a life of purpose? How does the experience of suffering have the potential to contribute to the development of a person's psyche and soul? What is the guidance in the Baha'i faith about mental disorders and their treatment? And in what way does living with a mental disorder, despite how challenging it is to be afflicted with these symptoms, how can that contribute to an individual's purpose in life? I can't read my own screen. Hang on one second. Let me see if I can move this thing. Okay, so the first question, which is kind of the crux of all of it, what is the purpose of our existence? Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, teaches that a human being's true identity is that of a noble soul, whose purpose is to improve ourselves and our society. Walking a path of service to humanity gives life meaning and prepares us for the moment our soul separates from our body and continues on its eternal journey towards its maker. What is the purpose of life? Again, the purpose of this life, and this is from Abdu'l-Baha, the purpose of this life is to acquire virtues. Wait a minute, let me see my screen again. To acquire virtues and spiritual qualities that we will require in our next existence, just as the purpose of the child in the womb is to develop limbs and eyes and organs that he needs for life in this world. If we fail to acquire spiritual qualities in this life, we will be spiritually handicapped in the next life, just as an embryo that fails to develop eyes and ears will be physically handicapped once he is born into this world. And this is an analogy that Abdu'l-Baha taught that I think puts so clearly why it's important to acquire virtues that while we're in this life, we may be fine without those virtues. We may live a life that we feel okay because the purpose of those virtues comes in the next life. How does the experience of suffering contribute to the development of a person's psyche and soul? Baha'u'llah teaches that the purpose of human life is to acquire virtues and spiritual perfections which every human being will carry with them to the next world. Everything we do in this life is preparation for the life to come. Suffering provides an opportunity for spiritual growth, no matter how unfair it may seem or unbearable it may feel. Abdu'l-Baha states, tests are benefits from God, for which we should thank him. Grief and sorrow do not come to us by chance. They are sent to us by the divine mercy for our own perfecting. So we're told to regard the tests of life, such as suffering with an illness or coping with a loss, as a blessing, the very opposite of what they seem to be. This doesn't mean we don't treat our illness or try to improve our symptoms. Rather, that we understand that there is meaning in every life experience, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones. So a little about my journey. Apart from being a mental health professional, I struggle with a mental disorder of my own. I began experiencing symptoms of depression at the age of 13, which worsened steadily until I was hospitalized at the age of 18 and diagnosed with bipolar depression. Despite almost unbearable symptoms, my faith provided me with the knowledge that my life, despite the severity of my suffering, had a greater purpose, which provided me with the strength to push through year after year. And I will tear out during this presentation, and I apologize. This is obviously a very strong emotion for me. Without the relief provided by my faith, I have no doubt that I would have fallen into substance abuse to cope with my symptoms, or might have even taken my own life to escape. My firm belief that God had a higher purpose for my existence kept me alive. After many years, I gradually became aware of the tremendous gift my illness had been for the development of my soul. Oops, let's go back. So a little more about my story. My life has been struggle after struggle. When I was 22, my mother died. I was severely depressed prior to her death, and losing her left me feeling desperately alone with what felt like unbearable pain. In the days before she died, I used to say this prayer, which perfectly describes my experience in losing her. Glory to thee, O my God. But for the tribulations which are sustained in thy path, how could thy true lovers be recognized? And were it not for the trials which are born for love of thee, how could the station of such as yearn for thee be revealed? The companions of all who adore thee are the tears they shed, and the comforters of such as seek thee are the groans they utter, and the food of them who haste to meet thee is the fragments of their broken hearts. Later, I understood that losing her was a tragedy, but also a gift. After my mother died, my relationship with my father, which had been largely eclipsed by my mother's presence in my life, grew into something of tremendous beauty. I also met and married my husband, the love of my life, under circumstances so improbable that I knew without a doubt that my mother's hand was in it. We met and fell in love while I was on a brief vacation in the Caribbean, not typically the way you find a lasting partnership. And this is why I felt very strongly that she was guiding that. I began to understand life differently at this point. Two exquisite relationships came about as a result of my mother's soul being freed from its physical frame. How could I be angry or despairing about her passing when such beautiful things had come into being as a result of it? The following quote best describes my relationship with suffering at this point in my life. But for the tribulations that have touched me in the path of God, life would have held no sweetness for me, and mine existence would have profited me nothing. So in a work of Baha'u'llah called The Seven Valleys, there is an exquisite love story that very much describes how suffering can be a blessing in one's life. And this is, Baha'u'llah wrote it in exquisite language, and I've taken some of his language, but also some of my language to simplify it slightly to tell this story. Baha'u'llah tells a story of a man who was searching for many years for the woman he loved. He became more and more depressed and desperate to be reunited with her as the years passed. Day after day, he found no rest in longing for her, and night after night, the pain of her kept him from sleep. The doctors knew no cure for him, and companions avoided his company. Finally, he became so despairing that he lost all hope. He felt that only death would free him from his suffering. One night, he left his house and went to the marketplace. Suddenly, a watchman began chasing him. The man broke into a run, with the watchman following, seeking to trap him. The lover thought to himself, surely this watchman is my angel of death, seeking to harm me. He kept running, desperate to escape the watchman. Finally, he came to a dead end, and with tremendous pain, he scaled a garden wall. Forgetting his life, he threw himself down to the garden below. He fell into the garden below, and there, to his astonishment, he saw his beloved with a lamp in her hand, searching for a ring she had lost. When he saw her, he cried out, "Oh God, give glory to the watchman, for he was the angel Gabriel guiding me to my beloved." Then he discovered there was a secret justice in the seeming tyranny of the watchman. The guard had led him to his beloved and saved his life. Now, if the lover could have seen what was to come, he would have blessed the watchman at the start and would have seen that tyranny as justice. But because he did not understand the meaning of what was happening, he saw only the suffering the guard was causing. But if a person possesses an understanding of the meaning of life's trials, they can find meaning in their struggle, even as it is happening to them. Again, nothing in life is without meaning. So, speaking a little directly about the guidance of the Baha'i faith about mental disorders. This, I believe, is from Shoghi Effendi. I've paraphrased it slightly. Although it can be tremendously difficult to be subject to any illness, particularly a mental one, these illnesses have nothing to do with our spirit or our inner relation to God. Sadly, medical science currently understands very little of the illnesses that afflict the mind. However, as the world becomes more spiritually minded and scientists understand the true nature of man, more humane and permanent cures for mental diseases will be found. Psychiatry, and this is just based on current psychiatric practice, is in its infancy. And the Baha'i faith says this clearly. Most psychiatrists will agree. We don't understand what mental illness is. And there's a lot of theories, and probably a lot of them are true. People may have different causes for what seems like the same illness. Most people have heard this chemical imbalance of neurotransmitters idea. There's also the concept that the pathways connecting the brain regions are dysfunctional, or that there's inflammation, microscopic inflammation in the brain that can produce symptoms. Trauma, of course, will play into it. Genetics is there. We know it runs in, these illnesses run in families. Infections can impact the brain and produce symptoms. Prenatal damage, of course, just like any other type of prenatal damage can affect the brain. Substance abuse clearly has a bad effect. And of course, poor nutrition and exposure to toxins can be problematic. This is more my musing about kind of other factors that play into mental health. How do we protect ourselves from forces that can harm our mental health? These are my observations. We live in a time of great uncertainty. We are surrounded by personal and societal events that are contrary to our true nature as noble spiritual beings. The current state of the world and its injustice, violence, and gross materialism rob individuals of their connection to their purpose as spiritual beings. Mental illnesses have biological components without a doubt, but these are most certainly worsened by living in a world in which we are repeatedly exposed to emotional and spiritual trauma, whether personal or societal. In my work, I've also seen that fear plays into mental illness in a tremendous way. I've consistently seen that many of those suffering from mental disorders are in a chronic state of fear. And this fear, in large part, is based in feelings of being disconnected from one's sense of purpose in life, and or a lack of understanding of one's spiritual nature. That's a frightful thing to not understand who and what one is, right? To feel that you're untethered. The knowledge that we are spiritual beings who are under the protection of God, however severe our difficulties, provides tremendous relief from fear and despair. The absence of this knowledge leaves us adrift emotionally, and for those who are predisposed to mental illness, can greatly worsen the course of the illness. Coming back to directly what the Baha'i teachings say, this is on a letter written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi. He says, "Know thou that the soul of man is exalted above and is independent of all infirmities of body or mind. You must always remember, no matter how much you or others may be afflicted with mental troubles, that your spirit is healthy, near to our beloved, and will in the next world enjoy a happy and normal state of soul. Let us hope in the meantime scientists will find better and permanent cures for the mentally afflicted, but in this world, such illness is truly a heavy burden to bear." Speaking specifically about psychiatric treatment, Shoghi Effendi says, "Psychiatric treatment in general is no doubt an important contribution to medicine, but we must believe it is still a growing rather than a perfected science. As Baha'u'llah has urged us to avail ourselves of the help of good physicians, Baha'is are certainly not only free to turn to psychiatry for assistance, but should, when advisable, do so. We are free to avail ourselves of the best medicine has to offer us." I think this is Abdul Baha, but it may be Shoghi Effendi. I'm sorry, I don't have the name there, but it's speaking about two types of treatment. There are two ways of healing sickness: material means and spiritual means. The first is by the treatment of physicians. The second consisteth in prayers offered by the spiritual ones to God and in turning to Him. Both means should be used and practiced. Illnesses which occur by reason of physical causes should be treated by doctors with medical remedies. Those which are due to spiritual causes disappear through spiritual means. Thus, an illness caused by affliction, fear, nervous impressions will be healed more effectively by spiritual rather than physical treatment. Hence, both kinds of treatment should be followed. They are not contradictory. Therefore, thou shouldst also accept physical remedies, inasmuch as these two have come from the mercy and favor of God, who hath revealed and made manifest medical science, so that his servants may profit from this kind of treatment also. Thou shouldst give equal attention to spiritual treatments, for they produce marvelous effects. Illness does not affect the soul. Know thou that the soul of man is exalted above and is independent of all infirmities of body or mind. That a sick person shows signs of weakness is due to the hindrances that interpose themselves between his soul and his body. For the soul itself remaineth unaffected by any bodily ailments. Consider again the sun when it is completely hidden behind the clouds. Though the earth is still illumined with its light, yet the measure of light which it receiveth is considerably reduced. Not until the clouds have dispersed can the sun shine again in the plenitude of its glory. Neither the presence of the cloud nor its absence can in any way affect the inherent splendor of the sun. This, I think, is an important point from the Universal House of Justice, talking about remaining active and purposeful. The House of Justice suggests that through daily prayer, through study of the writings, and through active participation in the activities of the community, and through constant effort to sacrifice the faith you love so well, you will provide a spiritual counterpart to this professional help you will receive from the experts. You should also endeavor to engage in some useful occupation, or by training yourself to have such an occupation, as work is itself another means at our disposal to draw nearer to God and to better grasp his purpose for us in this world. This is a question I think maybe a lot of us ask, and I think it's very helpful, this explanation. Why is it that although we pray, we are not always healed? The Baha'i writings contain many beautiful healing prayers. If we pray and ask God to heal us or a loved one, will that prayer be answered? Not always. Abdu'l-Baha explained why. The prayers which were revealed to ask for healing apply to both physical and spiritual healing. Recite them then to heal both the soul and the body. If healing is right for the patient, it will certainly be granted. But for some ailing persons, healing would only be the cause of other ills, and therefore wisdom does not permit an affirmative answer to the prayer. These are my words here. This does not mean that the prayer has no effect, rather that the outcome is not the one that we hope for. This is because God in his wisdom has decided that there is another outcome more beneficial to the development of our soul. And then the final question, in what way does living with a mental disorder, despite how challenging it is to be afflicted with these symptoms, contribute to the individual's purpose? This is all my insight, something I wrote reflecting as a therapist on what I was seeing. As a therapist, it's my job to help people with their pain. It's not easy to see people suffer so terribly. After years of working with people in pain, these are my insights of the meaning of human suffering. Human existence, by design, involves pain. No human being on earth is untouched by illness, loss, or some form of grief. At some point in our lives, we all experience them. There's no way to avoid them. We all get sick sometime. We all lose someone we love at some point. Death is inescapable. We all grieve our losses in our own ways. Logically, then, it seems that suffering cannot be avoided. If no human being can be free from pain, and if we make the assumption that there is some greater purpose to our existence, it would seem that pain serves some purpose for us. In nature and in human beings, things happen for a reason. And these are my thoughts, but they're inspired by Abdu'l-Baha. When trees lose their leaves in winter, there's a purpose. If we look at it solely from one point of view, it seems a terrible loss for the tree. If we don't understand the renewal process that happens with the change in seasons, the tree appears to be dying. The loss of the tree's leaves, however, far from indicating death, actually provides nourishment for the tree's continued growth. The tree actually needs to lose its leaves to continue to exist. Human beings have seasons too, seasons of loss, of seeming stagnation, of transition, and of growth. Growth doesn't happen without change, and change often means losing something to get something greater. Abdu'l-Baha teaches, if you plant a seed in the ground, a tree will become manifest from that seed. The seed sacrifices itself to the tree that will come from it. The seed is outwardly lost, destroyed, but the same seed which is sacrificed will be absorbed and embodied in the tree, its blossoms, fruits, and branches. These are my words. If the seed had the capacity for physical sensation, I would imagine the sensation of being ripped apart would be painful. Human growth also is often painful, or at least uncomfortable. We readily recognize this when it comes to our physical development. How often have we heard a coach or physical trainer say, no pain, no gain? And we accept this reasoning without question. No pain, no gain also applies to emotional and spiritual growth. Abdu'l-Baha says, the more difficulties one sees in the world, the more perfect one becomes. The more you cut the branches of a tree, the higher and stronger it grows. The more you put the gold in the fire, the purer it becomes. The more you sharpen the steel by grinding, the better it cuts. Therefore, the more sorrows one sees, the more perfect one becomes. The more often the captain of a ship is in the tempest and difficult sailing, the greater his knowledge becomes. Therefore, I am happy that you have had great tribulations and difficulties. Strange it is that I love you, and still I am happy that you have sorrows. This is from Abdu'l-Baha as well. Tests and benefits from God. So I think that tests are benefits from God for which we should thank him. Grief and sorrow do not come to us by chance. They are sent to us by the divine mercy for our own perfecting. Men who suffer not attain no perfection. The plant most pruned by the gardener is that one which, when the summer comes, will have the most beautiful blossoms and most abundant fruit. This is Abdu'l-Baha again. The mind and spirit of man advance when he is tried by suffering. The more the ground is plowed, the better the seed will grow, the better the harvest will be. Just as the plow furrows the earth, deeply purifying it of weeds and thistles, so suffering and tribulation free man from the petty affairs of this worldly life until he arrives at a state of complete detachment. His attitude in this world will be that of divine happiness. The greatest men have suffered most. Again, from Baha'u'llah, my calamity is my providence. Outwardly it is fire and vengeance, but inwardly it is light and mercy. Hasten thereunto that thou mayest become an eternal light and an immortal spirit. And this one I find particularly powerful. He says, the true lover yearneth for tribulation, even as doth the rebel for forgiveness and the sinful for mercy. Just a brief story about Abdu'l-Baha. He's the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, as he was introduced earlier. And he spent 40 years of his life in prison and was only liberated when he was an old man. When he was asked about how he felt while in prison and how he regarded his freedom, he responded, freedom is not a matter of place, it is a condition. I was thankful for the prison, for those days were passed in the path of service under the utmost difficulties and trials, bearing fruits and results. When one is released from the prison of self, that is indeed freedom, for that is the greater prison. When this release takes place, then one cannot be outwardly imprisoned. Unless one accepts dire vicissitudes, not with dull resignation, but with radiant acquiescence, he will not attain happiness. And this is just kind of a summary of everything. I know there's been a lot that I've talked about. Baha'u'llah's teachings on spiritual reality describe a spiritual existence that is full of joy, surrounded by God's love and submerged in the ocean of his protection, even in times of peril and suffering. Pain, though sometimes very hard to endure, is not our enemy, but can help us develop our souls. This doesn't mean we shouldn't try to treat symptoms of a mental illness, of course, and decide instead just to live with them. Naturally, we should do all we can to resolve symptoms of any disorder. However, if for whatever reason no relief is forthcoming, despite the best medical treatment and our own concerted efforts to get better, we should not despair. No matter how difficult it is to live with emotional pain, we can feel confident that for whatever reason, we are on the path God intends for us to be on, and that there is no benefit to us, and that there is benefit to us from being on that path, no matter how painful. Keeping our thoughts focused on our spiritual existence can greatly aid us in enduring life struggles. And that concludes my talk.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Julia. I don't know how to thank you, but something that I can tell you, you are truly in love with God. You are truly shining star is going to help so much. I can't tell you anything more, and I'm so delighted. Alex.
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for your presentation this evening. I wanted to start actually at the end and work our way to the front of your presentation. At the end, you mentioned a concept which, as a parent, reminds me of one of the wisdoms of Abdu'l-Baha and one of the guidances of Abdu'l-Baha that I wanted to get your feedback on.
Sure.
In reference to the role of the parent in child rearing, Abdu'l-Baha says, bring them up to work and strive and accustom them to hardship. Teach them to dedicate their lives to matters of great import and inspire them to undertake studies that will benefit mankind. And it's that first sentence there, accustom them to hardship. So, from the Baha'i perspective, is it that parents are supposed to be hard on their children and yell at them and make them sleep outside in the doghouse? or what's the real guidance there when Abdu'l-Baha says, from your perspective, when Abdu'l-Baha says accustomed?
Sure, yeah. I think what that means is that we are all going to face painful life circumstances, children included. There's no way to avoid them, and they're not all bad. And so I think, to my understanding, is that what's being said there is, it's okay for your child to be uncomfortable. It's okay for them to be going through a period where they're striving to cope with whatever challenge they're having. My understanding of parenting in that situation is that you're lovingly supportive, but that you're not fixing the problem for them. It's okay for them to have to work through that. At the end of the day, it's going to make them stronger adults, that they've had to deal with something that was hard and that they persevered. To me, the role of the parent is to stand by lovingly, offer good advice, and kind of just almost just inspire the child to find their own ways of coping. That's my understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well said. Thank you. And then as we look beyond the Baha'i faith, you mentioned both from your personal story as well as some of the stories that you introduced this evening. And I really do appreciate you opening up to us. The fact that, it didn't, just because we had struggles in our past doesn't mean we don't have success in our future. And sometimes the success of the future necessitates the struggle, as in, you can't become stronger. You can't become an Olympian unless you go through the struggle of practice every single day or exercise every single day in order to get to, your end goal there. And so even looking beyond the Baha'i faith, and clearly this is a spiritual concept that is presented to us, is told to us within the Baha'i faith. Do we see even non-Baha'is benefiting from such from a similar concept? Are there people outside, the Baha'i community that have intense struggles that are doing very well today, or have inspired humanity as a result of their struggles?
I think certainly. I think, God is the God of every human being, whether or not that human being even believes in God, right? I mean, his mercy encompasses all of us, even people who say he perhaps doesn't exist. And so I think there is divine mercy that is encompassing the soul of every person going through struggle. I do think it's helpful to have a concept of one's spiritual reality, because I think it provides sustenance, emotional sustenance, when you're having an episode of difficulty or of emotional pain. But God is merciful to all human beings. And I think all human beings can be inspired by the reality of God that's all around us without even necessarily having to open a holy book, right? I think it's just like, that's an additional level of assistance if you have access to that.
Thank you. And for our next question, I'm going to welcome Satya to the stage here. So Satya, yep, you're good.
Hi, Julia. Hello, everybody. Julia, this was such an important presentation. Thank you so much for bringing this topic to light on how the Baha'i faith can contribute positively to mental health and well-being. Thank you so much for explaining that correlation. It's something that I've been thinking about for a while. So my question is, we all have to go through suffering, how does God decide what types of suffering individuals will go through? For example, one person may suffer physical abuse at the hands of a relative, while someone else may suffer a tragic car accident. So different types of suffering.
I was interesting that you say this, because I was reading this something from Shoghi Effendi earlier today, where he actually says that at some point, sometimes after something happens, we gain the wisdom of why it happened and what the benefit was, but sometimes we never do. Sometimes we don't know, because we don't have the wisdom of God that would explain why a certain thing happened to a certain person, or why, exactly how it happened. And his advice to this believer to whom he was writing this letter was, don't worry about it. Don't even ask the question. Just have the absolute faith that whatever you're going through is for your own development, and move forward with that. Because it is perplexing to the human mind why certain things happen to certain people, and why certain people seem to be afflicted with incredible challenges and others may not. My personal belief is that not being afflicted with any challenges is not in our best interest. We need to have the hardship to strive and to overcome and to develop. But when it comes to your question, like why and how and what type and what, how's that all done? I think it's up to the mercy and the wisdom of God. And I think the less we seek to necessarily find the answer or need the answer, right? We can seek the answer. But if we need the answer, that sometimes gets in the way of us simply gaining the benefit of the situation. It's just my perspective.
Thank you so much. What a insightful answer. Thank you.
Julie, we've got another one here. It's going back to an earlier concept in your presentation you talked about, where the guidance from the guardian, who again, for those that are new to the faith, was the leader of the Baha'i faith from essentially the 1920s to his death in the 1950s. He mentioned that psychiatric treatment, or you brought up a quote and said psychiatric treatment is an important contribution to medicine. But then there's this caveat there where he says, but we must believe it is still growing than a perfected science. And so I wanted to kind of dive in there a little bit. The two parts here is, first, when do we know it's a perfected science? And then the second part is, what's an example of a perfected science? Because it seems like every single day there's something new in whatever scientific category that we're finding out just totally changes the paradigm.
So I think those are great questions. And I think actually Dr. Nasser and I were speaking earlier on about how the Baha'i faith says that illness of whatever kind in the future will be treated by food with nutrition. And that would be these are my words, my understanding, that is the healthiest and the most natural way to treat illnesses. And so I think that might be a touchstone, right? When we start to go more in the direction of natural treatments. So to me, we're in our infancy because we're kind of throwing these heavy hitting things at, for example, within mental health, the medicines are kind of heavy hitting and they have a lot of side effects, and they only provide maybe, 30 to 40% symptom relief is kind of what I'm seeing. I don't see an overwhelming benefit. So to me, I'm seeing it's in its infancy because we don't have effective treatments, and we also have treatments that have a lot of problems that come along with them, in terms of side effects or things that can affect a person's quality of life. So my understanding of when we might know that we're more near, an advanced understanding of medical science and particularly psychiatry will be, do we have more sustainable benefit? Do people get better? Do they get better where they can regain their quality of life? And do they get better in a way that they're not being impacted by, side effects from medicine that interfere with their quality of life? Kind of that one of those first quotes, I think, from Shoghi Effendi said, in the future, we'll find more humane treatments, and that are, I don't remember what he said, he didn't say long lasting, but he kind of said enduring treatments. That to me would be the touchstone. Do the treatments really work? Are they sustainable? And are they tolerable? That's my thought.
Yeah. And so, as we kind of put ourselves retrospectively in the context of when Shoghi Effendi would have made such a quote, this is when procedures like lobotomies were very commonplace.
Yeah.
So we certainly have the benefit today to think, maybe that didn't, we tried that. That might not have been a good option, but, we tried it. That's what we had available. And so
I think that's a really good point. He's probably writing that in the 40s or 50s or whatever. And I mean, absolutely now the treatments are more humane for sure. And absolutely they're more tolerable. And the things that are being seen now, like the Medical University of South Carolina was, prominent in researching brain stimulation, which is a really wonderful treatment for depression that doesn't involve anything invasive. You don't need to take medicine, and you don't need to have any dangerous procedures done. You just kind of sit under this machine that stimulates part of your brain, and they've had tremendous benefit with it. So to me, that's where we're going. We're going in a way that people can get benefit from less invasive procedures. And certainly, as you point out, 50 or 60 years away from when Shoghi Effendi wrote that, we've got a lot better. So good point. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And what's funny that you bring that up is that, we actually are still doing, as I'm sure you are aware, and a lot of our audience, we do electroshock therapy or brain stimulation today. And we did that, 100 so years ago, but it's very, very different. It's under the same
Right.
umbrella. And so a lot of people look at the stigma of like, oh, that we tried that 100 years ago, that's a bad idea. Whereas the technology, the advancement, the mechanism by which we're actually introducing this is totally fundamentally different.
It is fundamentally different, and it's tremendously beneficial. But the way that we are able to provide that, the electroconvulsive therapy now provides people with not the physical damage that we used to do with insulin treatment and the way we would shock them and they would be actually harmed by that. Now we have incredibly humane ways of doing it, and you wake up and you don't know anything happens. So you're absolutely right. There's been tremendous development there.
Yeah, absolutely. And without sharing my own story as well, we had a family member that was in her upper 90s getting electroshock therapy. And you wouldn't think that somebody in their upper 90s could sustain any physical challenge like that, but she always came out better.
Yeah. Glad for her.
Thank you. So as we do wrap up this evening, I know we touched on quite a few topics in relation to mental health. Is there something that you definitely just want to drive home for the audience, that if there's one thing they take away, this would be the thing that you want them thinking about as they fall asleep tonight and wake up tomorrow?
I think, to me, the takeaway from this is that while we don't have a total understanding of what these illnesses are about, and while the treatments that we have are in their infancy, although less in their infancy than they were 50 years ago, there's still a lot of untreated symptomatology that makes it very difficult for people to live quality lives. And I think my takeaway is a knowledge of one's existence as a spiritual being with a purpose that transcends suffering is the best medicine. Because if you know that no matter how horrible it is, what you're feeling and how unbearable it feels, that there's some purpose in that there's something to be gained, and that if you find the strength to push through, day after day, you will come in contact with what is there to be gained. And for me, my personal experience was, I like the person that I am. And I don't think if I hadn't gone through some of these experiences that caused a lot of humility, that made me reshape the compassion that I had for other people. I mean, when you go through suffering, you develop compassion. So I can reflect and say there were certain aspects of my personality that I really appreciate that were brought forward by what I had to go through. So I think my takeaway from this, if there's anything to take away, is that through any hardship in life, we can gain something. And if we have the knowledge that God is guiding us and that we can transcend our suffering, then the experience becomes very different.
Thank you. That's very wise. And what I heard you say there is essentially, as we begin an activity, knowing the end goal, seeing the end at the beginning is encouraging and enlightening and keeps us on track.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation this evening, and thank you for opening it up to us and sharing your story there. It's always encouraging to take things out of the abstract and see that peel back the curtain a little bit and actually get to know somebody. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
As I said, I'm honored to be here, and I hope that the sharing was helpful, and I'm glad to share a little slice of my insight.
Wow. Julia, you really helped everybody. And I can tell you from myself, I learned so much, and thank you so much. Truly, you are a lighting star, really. Wonderful, wonderful. Corey, are you ready?
Yes. Glorified art thou, O Lord my God. Every man of insight confesseth thy sovereignty and thy dominion, and every discerning eye perceiveth the greatness of thy majesty and the compelling power of thy might. The winds of tests are powerless to hold back them that enjoy near access to thee from setting their faces towards the horizon of thy glory. And the tempests of trials must fail to draw away and hinder such as are wholly devoted to thy will from approaching thy court. Methinks the lamp of thy love is burning in their hearts, and the light of thy tenderness is lit within their breasts. Adversities are incapable of estranging them from thy cause, and the vicissitudes of fortune can never cause them to stray from thy pleasure. I beseech thee, O my God, by them and by the sighs which their hearts utter in their separation from thee, to keep them safe from the mischief of thine adversaries, and to nourish their souls with what thou hast ordained for thy loved ones, on whom shall come no fear, and who shall not be put to grief.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Corey. And again, thanks everybody.